Why don't we just start, why don't we do some basics and just go, okay, when did it start, what's it supposed to do, and everything else, yeah?
Sure. So at the end of April will be the 2-year birthday of Kickstarter. It launched April 28th, 2009.
How many years?
2 years.
2 years.
But my partners and I started working on this a lot longer ago. Our CEO, my co-founder, Perry Chen, first had this idea in 2002. He was living in New Orleans and trying to put on a concert, but didn't have enough money to do it, and thought if only there was some mechanism that could tell me there was enough interest, it would happen. If not, it wouldn't. So he had that idea, and then in 2005, he and I met here in Brooklyn at a restaurant in Williamsburg called Diner, and we started working on this idea together. And at the time, I was working as a writer, as a pretend journalist, writing about music and culture and whatever. Yeah, there's a lot of those. But it was easy to see that this idea of artists not having money for anything, it was an actual problem. And that basically the only way you could get money from any sort of institutional source, meaning a record label or a film studio or a grant, would be if your project could produce revenue at the end. But of course, most ideas are just ideas, and the kind of ideas that we had that we wanted to do were just ideas. So we just felt like there was just something really missing there. It took us a while to get it going. So 2005, we started working pretty earnestly on it. About 2 years later, we brought on our third co-founder, a guy named Charles Adler, to help us design the site, because neither Perry or I are technical in any way.
Sure.
And then in 2009, it finally launched.
That's interesting because, we hear about Kickstarter and it seems to have come from nowhere. Suddenly overnight, but obviously behind a lot of these projects has been a long journey of hard work.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing was that we had a lot of time there. We had basically 4 years to shoot the shit and to talk ideas and play a lot of ping pong, which is basically what we did. And but during that time, we built the site up into this very, we had a lot of ambitions for it, and we complicated it. But fortunately, we had enough time to realize what a mistake that was. And so sort of the last year and a half before the site launch was spent ripping up a lot of our ideas. And the site that you see now is pretty much exactly what we wireframed in 2005. So we came to feel like we just needed to express the essence of the idea, because it's kind of a complicated concept to get around, to get your head around. So try to make it as basic as we can, and then just hope that people used it and liked it.
Okay, so how would you describe the service that you provide today?
Yeah, so Kickstarter is a funding platform for creative projects. We say creative projects, and that's kind of a made-up phrase, and we recognize that, but we really mean art and things sort of around the art. So we include technology in there, we include food, a lot of things like that. But it's a way for people in those worlds to raise money for whatever they want to do. So the way the site works is you post an idea of what it is you want to execute, whatever you want to bring to life. You say how much money you need to do it, and you give yourself a time limit to raise that amount of money. So I need $5,000 in 30 days. And we have an all-or-nothing system that seems really scary when you first start, and it ends up it's your friend. Where basically if you raise only $4,900, you get nothing. If you raise $5,000 or more, then you get exactly what you're looking for. But that trigger was really important to us from the beginning because it adds sort of a gaming aspect of, will this make it or won't it? It's fun to follow along. But also just really protects people, because if you need $10,000 to do something and you're promising people things, you've got to have that full 10 grand to actually fulfill, all this promise.
So these people who give the money, what do they get out of it? What do the backers get out of it?
Yeah, so at this point, at 2 years, we've had over 500,000 people have pledged to projects on Kickstarter. And there's about, 3,000 new people do it every day, so it's growing very quickly. But what they get is they get a few things. One is they get the glow of being a part of something interesting. There's that excitement of, holy shit, I'm just some guy, and now I'm a producer on some movie, and it's a movie I'm excited about, and I paid, $50 for that. So I think there's a social capital that comes that's really important. I think there's also that wanting to know where things come from. The reason why we shop at farmers markets, or why Whole Foods has been so successful, all these things where you'd like to have that tie to the source. And weirdly, that's something that's a little harder in art than it is to do in, say, food. So I think that a lot of that is what's happening. And then the final thing is just that you get something. So, it's not a donation platform. We bristle when people talk about it that way. Because we don't view this as philanthropy at all. Instead, it's, I get something in return. I give you $10, I get $10 of something back. And you get to define what that is.
Is it ownership in the idea, or is it other things?
No, there's never any ownership at all. I mean, this is another thing that I just thought seemed morally reprehensible. This idea that for the privilege of my idea to exist, you own it by funding it. Like, that just seems really crazy to us. There are a number of things like that I think that we were naive enough to think that we could do something about. But in this case, yeah, you always keep full ownership of your idea. Yeah. It's really important.
Well, that's obviously struck a chord because it's slightly counter to the way many kind of, I suppose, funding systems work today.
Yeah, I mean, funding always comes with strings. You know, money has a lot of requirements that come with it. And I think that one of the things that happens with something like crowdfunding, where you have such a distributed network of funders, is that none of them have any say at all because there's so many. You know, if you have 200 backers behind your film, your art project, or your record, you know, you have to answer to those people, you know, maybe emotionally, or provide them an experience that they're going to like. But there's really nothing beyond that. And, you know, I think that's really exciting when you think that through a couple steps. Where a lot of the reason why art is the way it is because of the demands of the money, you know, that comes into it. So film is always 90 minutes because someone wants to put it in a theater so that they can screen it and, you know, they can sell tickets. But if you think of the idea of the internet funding something, and the internet having just the demands of, you know, a good experience, and probably that's about it, I think suddenly the format of art can change pretty dramatically. And I bet that we'll see that happen in the next couple of years.
It's interesting that there's been this kind of growth at a time when money supposedly has been scarce,
right?
But still people are willing to donate for these often fun and inspiring projects.
Yeah, we used to get asked a lot, I guess we still do, about what were we thinking, or what do we think about launching a company like this during the economic apocalypse? And obviously we'd have chosen to launch the company 5 years ago when we really wanted to. But it worked out anyway, and I think that people are, you know, basically generous. But also this is another kind of spending. You know, it's not exactly going and buying something at Best Buy or buying a gadget or something like that. There's something more emotional here that I think taps into a different part of somebody. So in the 2 years since we've launched, $50 million has been pledged through the site.
Congratulations.
And yeah, right now it's, you know, well over, it's about $1.5 million a week right now. And it's just growing steadily. And so that's happening, you know, on a platform with no celebrities. I mean, I don't know who the most famous person is who used Kickstarter. Maybe the guy who made Helvetica, Gary Hustwit. So maybe he's the most famous person who ever used Kickstarter, and that's fine with us. Yeah. And to still have that level of volume, with it all being just, you know, regular people, is really exciting.
So you're actively involved in the projects, or, you know, you talk to the artists and the creatives. Let's talk about some of your favorite recent projects, maybe, that you've engaged and got people onto the system with. Yeah,
I mean, well, so the process for how projects come in is kind of interesting. You know, we don't curate, but we do talk to everyone before they start, and you basically have to write a college admissions essay to get in. I mean, not really, but we ask you to talk about what is it you want to do, what people will get. We ask you to define sort of the parameters of your idea. And we do this not because we are exercising any aesthetic judgment. You know, we've never told anyone to change the third act, or to lose 10 pounds, or to ditch the singer, or anything like that. You know, if you're making art, it's cool. Bad art's fine, it's still art. But we do make sure that everyone meets our guidelines, which chiefly means we don't allow any fundraising for charities or causes, not even like I'll donate a portion of the proceeds to a charity. You know, it's sort of our hardest, firmest rule that we have. And the reasoning for that is that we really wanted to define fundraising as something other than just philanthropy and the bake sale. And we thought to do that we really needed a radical break with how it's been done in the past.
Okay.
And you know, the intention all along was to help, you know, our peers, artists, creative people, that world. And so the idea of having charities in the mix there, I think, throws a moral component into it that's a little tough to, you know, to think about, where if you're thinking about backing this singer-songwriter kid, but next to it is a project for Haiti, you know, how are you going to feel about that? You're going to feel guilt about that. So we wanted to remove that entirely. But you write in and you say what you want to do, and a member of our team, there's one of 6 of us, will write back to you personally and talk to you about your project, and either say, cool, let's do it, or sorry, this doesn't meet something, or whatever. So we get about 250 proposals a day that come in, of people writing and asking to start a project. And we accept a little over half of those.
That seems quite a manual process.
It is a very manual process. I don't think that we can do that forever, unfortunately. But it's fun. It's nice. It's nice to have those conversations, and it really started with at the very beginning. To seed the site, myself, the few of us who are working on Kickstarter, we just gave invites to our friends and asked them to start projects and asked them to ask their friends, and that was it. And then people started emailing in and asking if they could start ones of their own, and suddenly I was having these email conversations with, weird opera directors in Cleveland and stuff about what they wanted to do. It was amazing. It was really, really exciting. So we like getting to do that. It's nice to actually get to talk to the people who are making things. It's a lot of how we spend our time. But in terms of specific projects, sorry.
Let's throw out some.
Yeah.
Let people understand what sort of things get funded.
Yeah, I mean, so there's been an interesting thing that's happened in the past about 8 months where, originally the kinds of things that are happening on Kickstarter were a lot of film, a lot of records, very traditional art things. And then last September we had a project come from two guys based here in New York called the Glyph. And basically they invented a little tripod stand for an iPhone for very simple piece of rubber. They made a really clever Wes Anderson-inspired, basically spot for it. That was their project video. Kickstarter is very video-driven, and they're looking to raise 10 grand, and they pretty quickly raised about $140,000. And PSFK was part of the reason for that. Blogs picked it up. It was very clever. They were likable guys. It was, they explained the manufacturing process. All these things. They really did it right. So yeah, $140,000, and then suddenly Kickstarter became a place for products, and we felt conflicted about this.
Yeah, how does that work? Because I know you have some issues about the kind of commercialization.
Yeah,
corporates.
Yeah, we're nervous about it, and we're more accepting now. We were sort of fighting against it a little bit for a while because we just weren't sure. It felt different. These weren't necessarily quixotic projects by some tortured artist, which wasn't the sole intent, but our heart was kind of with those things. And so basically where we came down was if it's a person or a couple people really doing something on their own, then it's cool. Anything bigger than that, or anyone being like, I want to start an Apple accessories company, that would not be cool. Yeah. So that's the small distinction that we came up with that made us feel better.
Maybe Nate, you can bring up the Glyph. You still have the Glyph
it's still up there. Glyph. It's a good one to look at. But so that's created this product development aspect of Kickstarter. It accounts for about 10% of the money on the site right now. But we've had some really big successes. GLIF. And these two guys just launched another project just 2 weeks ago called the Cosmonaut, which is like a stylus for the iPad. And that one they've raised $100,000 in about a week. And in that case, they did something interesting where they did a pay what you want model, where they basically said, you could pay, like the average cost they would need to do this right would be about $15, but you could pay whatever you want from $1 to whatever. But they created a limit for how many could be sold. So basically, unless the per unit cost worked out exactly right, the project would fail. And so people would have to adjust their pledges up and do all these things. But then they abandoned the idea at the last second and opened it up more. But if you want to press play on the video, I don't know if we have sound, but even you'll get a sense from just...
Hello, Kickstarter. My name is Tom Gerhardt. This is Dan Provost. And this is our project, the Glyph. It's an iPhone 4 tripod mount and stand.
Talk through the process of making a thing. But what's really interesting to us, and I think a lot about this, is I think that Kickstarter's created this new format, this new medium of the anti-commercial. Because all these projects, like 80% of our projects have a video, and they're all people selling themselves. But the thing is that most of these people are very uncomfortable selling themselves. So they will leave in all the bad takes and all the awkward stutters, and they'll try to make it clear that they are uncomfortable on camera, but then go and try to sell you the thing anyway. And so there's a lot of this like very homemade commercial making that's happening for people who are never on camera, and it's all about, I don't know, fighting their own anxiety and trying to express what they want to express. But this is a good example, and you can see here why people would react to this. It's not usual to see a commercial along these lines.
Sure. So they make the ad before the product gets made.
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
you don't need to make another ad because you've got the audience.
And you have the story. So in this case, they're selling this, online, and I'm sure they're going to get it into retail spaces. I know they're talking to some big places. So this product, this product development category has been an interesting one for us. And after this, pretty quickly, we had a project from a guy named Scott Wilson, who used to be creative director at Nike and has done a lot of very big things. And he designed a watch band called the Tik Tok, which is a watch band to turn an iPod Nano into a watch. And he put that up trying to raise, I think, $15,000. It was like $40 to get the cheaper version of the watch wristband, $60 to get the bigger one, and it ended up TIK, one word. And so he tried to raise $15,000, and he ended up raising $950,000. And that happened in about 5 weeks.
What's he going to do with all that money?
Well, so we get this question a lot. So what's he going to do with the extra $930,000? Probably throw a really good party. No, what's interesting is that all that money is coming in as pre-orders for these things, so he has to use it to make more. Obviously, his margins get better when he's ordering. It's about 20,000 end up getting ordered out of this. So his margins are getting better with manufacturing. But I'm sure he turned a profit off of that, and we're very comfortable with that.
Yeah,
that's
even though he's
us.
like Nike executive.
Yeah, well, yeah. It was.
God.
We're tortured with a lot of these things, but we talked to him about it, and he came at this as, I'm just a guy who has this thing I want to do, and I think it'd be a lot cooler to do it this way. And that's the kind of spirit that we really look for. And as this has gone on, I think the idea of what a Kickstarter project has some inherent traits to it. And so a lot of what we're looking people to do is to express their ideas within the concept of a Kickstarter project. And that means, everything on the site has to be defined as a finite project, so it has a beginning and an end, so people can know when it's completed and when to expect, whatever they get out of it. And that it has to have rewards, so that everyone else benefits just as much as you. And so if it has those things and express itself in this kind of spirit, then we're cool.
So you provide this service and you provide this audience. What's driving people to, firstly, want to create these products, and then what's driving people to donate and be part of it? Do you have some sort of thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is where it's kind of pretty chill for us. Scott Wilson here, he wants his $15,000. He's out there, beating the pavement trying to find that money, and he's spreading the word in social media, through press like you guys, through whoever. So every project's really being driven by its creator. And for us, the beautiful thing is, it's very easy marketing on our behalf. We don't have we have one marketing person, but it also, when they tell their story, it inspires other people in their networks to do the same, because everyone has that thing they really want to do. And part of what we're interested in is just that. I think life sort of beats that out of you a little bit, right? Like as you get older, it gets a little bit harder to do those things that you really feel passionately about, because it's too impractical and better things to do, and it's frivolous, all those kinds of things. And so we let that part of ourselves die, or we just don't pay attention to it anymore until we're like 65 and we decide to learn how to play the bass or something, And but what we really believe is that just creating a place where those ideas, however silly, however small, can just have a home where you're just like, I want to publish 50 copies of my poetry from college, even though it's terrible, but just because I want my 10 friends to have it. Like, there's something beautiful about that. And we want to be a place where those sorts of ideas, those notions can have a home.
Yeah. And then the spirit behind the donations and the funding.
Yeah, I mean, people they want to be a part of things. I mean, it's exciting. Like in this case, if you are a backer of the TikTok, and I am one, and I have a TikTok, and it's cool. It's cool when you wear one, and people are like, "What is that?" And you're like, "Oh, I helped make this." Like it's my story too. I don't have $946,000, unfortunately, but this is part of my. I'm part of this story, and so if this goes on to be hugely successful and whatever, that's great. There's a piece of that I get to brag about, and I think that's something that motivates people. It's fun.
That's super. I thought what we'd do is we'll open up some of the conversation to the audience.
Sure.
There's a microphone somewhere. There we go. Yeah, you got them. Super. Anybody want to ask Yancey a question?
Well, I'll tell. While people get brave enough to step up, I'll tell a story of one of my favorite rewards that we ever had on the site. I think is very indicative of how Kickstarter works. Early on, we had a project by a woman named Emily Richmond. She's like a 24-year-old girl from LA who her dream was to sail around the world alone, to do a solo circumnavigation of the globe, which is something that would take her 2 years. And so one of her rewards was for $15, she would take a Polaroid at some point on her trip, and the next time she got into a port, she would mail it to you from wherever she was. And so in that, there's just like such a story packed into it, and it's such a romantic idea of this, this single artifact making its way to you across the world, and how you become a part of that story. And so for the first year and a half, this was the anecdote that I talked about most often when discussing Kickstarter. And then about 3 or 4 months ago, I got my envelope, and it was like this beaten up envelope, had a stamp from, I forget where it was, somewhere in the South Pacific. And open it up, and there's a Polaroid there of just like this faded beach, and like you could see the jungle, and there's a letter with it of her writing about where she was sitting as she took the photo, and just describing what she had seen and what she had done that day. And so that Polaroid is something I will keep in my dresser mirror for the rest of my life. And that's something that I'm a part of now, and I'm just some creepy guy on the internet. So. But stuff like that is great. It's great.
Super. Do you have any questions? I wasn't thinking properly when I thought Q&A first session.
Yeah.
Anybody warmed up?
Hi, I was actually just wondering if you could talk about the reassurance you give to the people who submit the ideas on your website about intellectual property and having their ideas stolen. So we can just kind of talk to that.
Sure. We keep all the best ideas for ourselves. No, people have a lot of concerns about that. People will write in and want to send us an NDA before they send us their proposal, and we'll just say, listen, we don't care that much, and you shouldn't care that much. I think that it's kind of a cliche, but ideas are kind of cheap. It's actually doing something. We haven't had any cases of someone putting up some project and then Belkin going and making it for the masses immediately afterwards or anything like that. But there is no protection that we offer. The protection is just that it's hard to actually go through with things and execute them. That's about it.
How's it going? I just had 2 questions. One was, the business model.
Sure.
And 2 was really, as far as the donations, have there been any kind of legal kind of ramifications of people getting the money and kind of running away, or, how does that really work?
Sure. 2 good questions. So we do have a business model. So if your project is successfully funded, you raise your goal, we take 5% of what you've raised. We instituted that about 4 months after we launched. That was always the intention, and we are a profitable company from that. We have 22 employees, and we're growing quickly. So it's nice to be sustainable. In terms of people taking the money and going to Cuba and living large, we haven't had any cases of that I know of. But for most of these projects, if I'm a band, the people giving me money are going to be my fan base and probably my mom and people who love me. So if you're willing to fuck over those people, you have greater problems. That's not to say those kinds of people won't find their way to Kickstarter. If things get bad, backers can take legal action. We have no role in that. We're like eBay or Etsy, where we're just sort of a pass-through. But what we believe is that there are social forces that really drive people to stay honest. That you don't want to be embarrassed in front of your peers, you don't want to fuck over your friends, and that will force people to, to follow through. And so far that looks like that's true. The biggest issues we'll have are someone takes the money, they go and they start doing the thing and they just don't tell anybody what they're doing. And after 3 months, people are posting comments just being like, what the hell is going on? So we have to teach people a lot about communicating and about being transparent. If you're posting a daily diary from the set and, even if it's things are going to shit, that's still, entertaining. And I'm still getting something out of that. And so we encourage people to just be very, very honest and open as much as they can.
Let's talk about, I'm going to keep going back to this corporate idea theme, because obviously the model's changed. And when I first heard about Kickstarter, I understood it was very much of the arts. And we have this exploration.
Yeah.
And there's obviously many people in my audience. I showed you the attendee list.
Sure.
And who either come from a corporate side or they come from a marketing side and so forth, who probably go, we could use that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
we hear a lot from companies who are interested in using Kickstarter either internally as a way to, float ideas within the company up to the top, that sort of concept, or if, hey, we want to do like a public R&D for something, test this concept, or even wanting to advertise or partner with us in some sort of way. And the thing is that I'm not convinced that corporations doing it in that way would necessarily work. I think it depends on the corporation. What people are really responding to here, in a lot of cases, is the story. Being a part of something, wanting to be on the ground floor of someone who's interesting, someone who's going to go on and make something of themselves. I don't know if people feel that same way about companies. Certainly they would Apple. Certainly would people like that.
Yeah.
But we do hear from a lot of brands who want to sponsor projects, who want to have some presence on Kickstarter. And to date, we've told all of them no. We like the purity of it just being a platform of just people supporting other people and that being it. And, I think brands being in there is a dangerous thing. Mm-hmm. I do find the idea of making companies give artists large sums of money attractive. Yeah. But I'm not naive enough to think that there isn't a big cost to that.
It's interesting, it's part of this trend, if I can say, of this disintermediation that, we don't need to go through the companies to create art, create new projects. And that goes across a whole bunch of themes, sectors, and so forth,
Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah. I mean, I think that, we have on our guidelines now one that says no funding for businesses, projects only. And I think that's one that we're probably going to drop. Not because we're into suddenly having a site flooded with businesses, but there are kinds of businesses that make sense. There's a restaurant, a pop-up restaurant in Kenmare Square called What Happens When that has gotten rave reviews everywhere, and that was a Kickstarter restaurant. Mm-hmm. The chef, whose name I'm forgetting, he started Dovetail. Basically had this idea to make a restaurant in a different way, to do a 9-month, temporary thing.
Changes every month, yeah.
Yeah, everything changes every month, and the Kickstarter backers influence how it changes too. So you're asked to submit certain ideas or, a color or whatever, and they incorporate those in some way. And also, all the backers' names are written around the bathroom walls. Which, maybe there could have been a better place for that. But it's amazing. I went for the first time last Friday, and it was spectacular, just a great meal. But to see something like that and to know that Kickstarter had a hand in that is really exciting. And so we're into having more restaurants come about and things like that. But real corporate stuff, we're still we're nervous about.
We can park that. And so maybe as a final question, where do you see it all going?
I think that Kickstarter, as you see it, is hopefully pretty close to what it will be 3 or 4 years from now. When I think about where it's going, I think more about broader cultural shifts than I do necessarily the site itself. Mm-hmm. I think that Kickstarter can be its own economy, a creative economy of this type of person, just supporting things that they love and having that direct relationship. And it could be that there's a single $10 bill that floats all around the world as people give it to each other, and I think that's kind of awesome if it works out that way.
You have your own currency?
Yeah, sure. Why not? But when I look at like right now at the almost 2-year point, there's close to 3,000 projects right now that are funding, and I'm sure a year from now it will be many times that. And when I think about how much money will be flowing to those things, it's pretty exciting. 50 million will officially hit in probably a week or two, and that'll be a big milestone to us. But the NEA's annual budget's $160 million. I think about when is it that we pass that. Things like that I think are pretty intriguing.
Fantastic. Well, I wish you every luck.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, Yancey Strickler.
Thank you.